It's a fascist state,
Mm-hmm.
pure and simple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It has all the characteristics of a fascist state.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, it was kind of restricted to certain states where the Hindu nationalist political party was able to win elections. But in the recent state elections that just occurred this spring, using a lot of underhanded tactics that are kind of similar to what's going on in the US to disenfranchise people, like in the state of West Bengal, they disenfranchised, millions of voters. Overnight, they basically launched a project where people's homes were visited, and you had to produce a whole lot of documents to get on the voter list. People who had voted in multiple elections before without any problem. And then when the voter lists were declared, many people found themselves off the list.
The interview you're about to listen to covers a wide variety of topics and an actual massive geographic range. Today we're talking about fascism, not in its usual color that we've come to know down south of the border and at times here in Canada. This is saffron fascism, also known as Hindutva, also known as Hindu nationalism. Today I spoke with Lily Paul, someone who is involved with the South Asian Diaspora Action Collective, also known as SADAC. SADAC has been doing a lot of work around raising awareness against Hindutva organizing, not just in India, of course, but unfortunately in Montreal. So Lily Paul spoke to me about how well they're organized, what it is that they're doing, and even one unfortunate instance where they showed up to a SADAC event. I think there's a lot of important things that Lily Paul and I talk about, and we get to learn a lot about just the many tactics and types of actions that SADAC takes, as well as a little about the history of South Asian organizing in Montreal and how that goes back decades. At Lily Paul's request, this interview does not have a video component. We decided to protect her anonymity because of the dangers around her organizing work. In the past, different South Asian Diaspora Action Collective members have been organized, harassed by Hindutva far-right forces. So because of that, we are attempting to keep her identity safe. Here's the interview. Hello, everyone. My name is Kalden Dhatsenpa. You are listening to Local 514. Today's guest, Lily Paul from SADAC, but it's, I think, a little inaccurate to say that that's the only organization you're involved with. I asked Lily Paul to come on today to speak a little on the work that SADAC is doing and just give us context of that work in the wider world of South Asian diaspora organizing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kalden, and 514 also for having me and representing SADAC.
Of course, of course. Could you start off with speaking to the name? So I think in the pre-show, I was, and honestly, for most of my knowledge of SADAC, I've been calling it SADAC because that is the actual, the literal acronym for it, South Asian Diaspora Action Collective. But can you tell me a bit about what the name is a play on?
Yeah, so when we were searching around for a name, we wanted a name that kind of represented who we were, but also a name that had some reverberations with words from South Asia. And that's kind of also a challenge because there's so many languages there. Mm-hmm. So we came up with the South Asian Diaspora Action Collective, which provided an acronym, which, as you said, literally spelled out is SADAC, but the word SADAC is the word for road or pathway. So it's a play on that word as well.
Incredible, incredible. I guess start us off with introducing our audience to the group, the organization, and what kind of work they're doing.
So SADAC is composed of a group of individuals. Some are, for lack of a better term, I'll say more permanently involved, and some sort of come and go partly because they might be in the city and sort of in a more transient way. Or also it's a question sometimes of time. Sometimes people have more time and then they get heavily involved in other things. The demographic is generally, I would say, younger, well, at least quite a bit younger than I am. but younger, and individuals who have been involved even before the formation of SADAC, either in certain earlier iterations of South Asian youth organizing in Montreal or elsewhere. And some have a lot of experience in particular areas of organizing in terms of migrant justice or anti-racism work or student politics, etc. So we're a bit of a motley crew.
What is it that you think ties everything together, that ties the politics and actions of the group together?
Well, one key thing is we are of South Asian origin, though it's not exclusionary if there are people who are not, who want to participate. As far as I know, it's not really happened, but and we have a lot of allies and work in solidarity with other groups. So a South Asian kind of identity. We feel very close to South Asia. Many of us have family there. We travel back and forth, and a deep concern about the situation in South Asia, the deteriorating political situation with human rights, very narrow-based kinds of nationalisms in different parts of South Asia, the economic crisis, and many things. And we feel that even though we are in the diaspora, we can do a variety of things. One is we've known, even in earlier work that many of us were involved in, the importance of raising issues in the diaspora, either just as an expression of solidarity, which means very much when people are working in isolation to know that across the oceans there are people who are thinking of you, supporting you, trying to get your message out. That's always really important. But also governments are very concerned about their image, the public image abroad. And so when we raise issues about human rights violations, for example, or repression of minorities, it's kind of frowned upon. And this has happened quite a lot recently. Maybe we'll get into that later. But we're also very implicated in work here. So some of us are involved in groups like Solidarity Across Borders, the South Asian Women's Community Center, the Immigrant Workers Center, Women of Diverse Origins, which organizes the International Women's Day March in Montreal, or working with marginalized communities in neighborhoods where there might be a lot of South Asians, for example. So we're implicated in this work. And then things sort of happen. Somebody's going to be deported, and one of us gets to know because of what the work we're doing, and we use our networks and resources to amplify, to support, either in terms of getting letters written or actual physical support. Somebody's just been released from the Laval Migrant Prison Center, so picking that person up, taking care of them. Sometimes they might need medical attention. So it varies, but there's a lot of work. Everyone's really, really busy all of the time.
I can only imagine. Can you tell me about the first formation of SADAC and how that came to be?
Yeah, so it happened somewhat organically. As I said, those of us who are members of SADAC, belong to SADAC, have already been politically active in the city. And then at the end of 2019 and into 2020, there was this huge sort of spontaneous mobilization that happened in India in response to the Indian government's implementation of something called the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, where they were basically trying to remove citizenship from many Indians by virtue of them not having papers. And in a country like India, not everybody has a birth certificate. To get documentation is very, very difficult. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. And it was essentially targeting minority communities, particularly Muslim communities. It also coincided, the CAA, with a crackdown on student activism in the capital city, Delhi. And sort of local communities and students got together and organized a sit-down in a neighborhood called Shaheen Bagh. Actually, the leadership for that came from women who were not politically active. They were mothers. They were women who usually stayed home taking care of their families. But they said, how dare they attack the students, and what are they doing? And this is what we're going to do. And that became a focal point. It attracted all kinds of activists, and every day, particularly in the evening after work, people would convene there. There would be poetry readings, singing, speeches, and all kinds of other issues were being brought to the fore as well. The government was not at all happy with it. And at that time, those of us who lived here in Montreal began to organize teach-ins on various issues related to the Citizenship Amendment Act and other things that were going on. And a group kind of mobilized. And we felt coming out of that, maybe we should have like a more formal organization. COVID hit, and so the Indian government very happily could then kind of clear out that encampment for public health reasons. But we continued to meet on Zoom, and gradually out of that, it was felt we should have something a little more permanent to take this type of work forward. And that's the genesis of SADAC.
Incredible. Now, I guess for some of the audience who's not too familiar with Indian politics and kind of what's going on there with the government right now, how would you describe the current state of affairs in India with regards to the nationalist government?
It's a fascist state, pure and simple. It has all the characteristics of a fascist state. If you go on various websites, there are 14 characteristics. Unfortunately, it has all of them. And initially, it was kind of restricted to certain states where the Hindu nationalist political party was able to win elections, because India has a federal system like Canada. So you have national elections, but you also have state elections. But in the recent state elections that just occurred this spring, using a lot of underhanded tactics that are kind of similar to what's going on in the US to disenfranchise people, like in the state of West Bengal, which was very staunchly against this political group. They disenfranchised, millions of voters. Overnight, they basically launched a project where people's homes were visited, and you had to produce a whole lot of documents to get on the voter list. People who had voted in multiple elections before without any problem. And then when the voter lists were declared, many people found themselves off the list. So there were like people coming from poorer, marginalized backgrounds, but there were also like very well-educated university profs who voted, who pay their income tax. So it's clear that they're on all kinds of lists. And then a case was brought to the Supreme Court of India, which then said, okay, the government has to kind of set up some kind of way of figuring out who should be on the list, but there was not enough time. And they won the election in the state of West Bengal. So this is what I mean by underhanded tactics. And now, the states where they weren't are now being controlled by them. And very quickly, whenever they controlled states, and even before they controlled states, they would go after individuals who were seen as anti the government in more vociferous ways, but also quieter ways. They would launch enforcement department investigations and things like that. And of course, in more draconian ways, they would also arrest people under the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which has been there for ages. It's not this government, but it's like a cover-all that can include all kinds of possible activities. And if you are charged with that, you are arrested and you're denied habeas corpus. There are people who have been in jail for 8 years now under this. They haven't been granted bail. There was an 80-year-old Jesuit priest who had worked with indigenous people. He was put there, and he was suffering from Parkinson's disease. And he had asked for a straw so he could drink water. They denied that to him. So it's really, really awful. It's scary, and more than ever now, the need for solidarity and amplifying the message is needed.
Right. And that's, I imagine, part of the work that SADAC is doing here in Montreal, right?
Yes. And SADAC works in collaboration with other groups doing similar work in other parts of Canada. So like Canadians for Human Rights and Democracy in India, and similar groups in the United States and Europe as well.
You mentioned it a little before, but I think one of these SADAC workshops I saw was sort of raising awareness about this kind of right-wing Hindu nationalism. Can you tell me a bit about how it was received? I do believe to understand that there was one, I believe 2 years ago, where there was sort of a counter mob that appeared.
Yeah. So that would have been in 2024. There was an event organized actually here at Cooper Concordia, because SADAC has working group status with Cuba Concordia. It was August 15th, which was deliberately chosen because that's Indian Independence Day. And there was an event where we were going to have in-person speakers, as well as we were Zooming in some speakers from India. A young woman, for example, Afreen Fatima, whose house was bulldozed. So that bulldozer kind of technique or strategy that is being used against Palestinians is also being used in India. In fact, I think it was the year before, in the India Day Parade, which is very big in places like New York and New Jersey, they took a bulldozer in the parade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Afreen Fatima and who's a very young woman, very eloquent, amazing young woman whose house was bulldozed, and Tisa Setalvad, who's a longer-standing political activist who herself was put in jail. And we had actually mobilized here. This is before the formation of SADAC. And we got 50 eminent Canadians to sign a letter, Margaret Atwood and various other well-known jurists, etc. She was released, not just because we got 50, but it created a buzz. It was reported in the press here. You know, the Indian government is watching. The High Commissioner is always watching. So those were the speakers. And it coincided with what was going on in Bangladesh at the time. So you may or may not recall that there was a student uprising, and finally the government fell. And Bangladesh is a majority Muslim country, but has large Hindu and Buddhist minority populations and Christian populations. And so there were reports that certain Hindu temples were being attacked by Muslim fundamentalists, etc. And of course, this got amplified a great deal by the Hindu ethno-nationalists, both in India and the ones who are here. There are Hindu ethno-nationalists here, including at Concordia University. So this August 15th event was advertised with posters all over, so it wasn't a secret. And before the event could start, a bunch of Hindutva supporters showed up in the building and demanded to be let into the space. And a decision was taken that we knew that they wanted to be there not because they wanted to listen or participate, but so we said, like, sorry, you can't come in. And they got really, really angry. And they had placards saying Hindu genocide and so on. And they said, these people that you've invited, they are terrorists, Muslim terrorists in India. Anyway, the meeting started, but they kept banging on the door. It's a glass door. Then they pulled the fire alarm. The fire department came, and of course there was no fire, and they kept doing that. And in some ways, it was very, very scary. I was moderating. I wasn't actually initially going to be a moderator, but one of the moderators was involved in trying to keep them at bay. So I stepped in, and it was like we were in a room that only had one exit door, and they were outside. And I thought, my God, like they could start a fire or do anything. And we're like, so it's palpable. And I kept thinking, like, here we are in Montreal, feeling afraid. Can you imagine people in India whose lives are like on the line on a daily basis? Oh, and I should have added that actually we had booked Disev Cinema for the event. But at the last moment, we just got an email from Concordia Security saying, sorry, your booking has been canceled, not giving us any reason. And what we assume happened was that the people on campus who are affiliated with these Hindutva groups wrote to the Concordia administration. Because I think the publicity, I forget the exact title, did use the word like Hindutva fascism. And they get very upset when they're identified as fascists. It's like, walks like a duck, talks like a quacks like a duck, come on,
Yeah, sure.
But they get very irate with being called out in this way.
It sounds like they're pretty well organized, despite, because I think our usual assumptions with these kinds of, like, when we're talking about nationalist groups, they're usually of course, they're most powerful in the whatever the host kind of nation. But I think to me, it always struck me that like despite this kind of distance, despite being like thousands of kilometers away, they're here and they're so organized that they can show up, disrupt a protest, that they're, I guess, around enough and organized enough that they can even like, they get in the way of this kind of organizing. I'm kind of curious, what is, I guess, the history of some of these nationalist groups here in Montreal? How are they numerous? What are their tactics?
Yeah, so, I've lived in Montreal for many years, and there are supporters of this Hindu ethno-nationalist movement the movement goes back over a century now. So it's been around for a long time, and over the years there have been people, in fact, some people at Concordia, right? But it's been much, much smaller, much low-key, and often presented as supporting development work. So there's a doctor in Montreal who has fundraisers, and other doctors and health professionals go. It's to raise money for a health clinic and a school in this part of India.
Right,
But
hardly objectionable.
yeah, who's running the health clinic and the school? It's the Hindu ethno-nationalist grassroots organization, which has also contributed to their popularity, because in some places they are the only people providing education, providing healthcare. So a lot of people, it's not that they go there because they are ideologically linked, but that's where
they provide material benefits.
And people who go to these events here who are not of South Asian origin or anything just go to support. So that's one level. They have been here. But there's another aspect to it. And so, Hinduism is a very amorphous religion. It's everything and nothing. You can be almost an atheist, and there's a philosophic kind of Hinduism, and you can be involved in very, daily rituals, venerating various gods and goddesses. So it can be everything. And that's another problem, because it's not about Hinduism per se that concerns us. It's the kind of narrow interpretation of what Hinduism is, which actually excludes other variants of Hinduism, but also a Hinduism that is presented as being oppositional to Islam and other religions, that India has always been a Hindu nation, so the rewriting of history, just not. And looking at, say, Muslims who came in as interlopers and consistently interlopers, and people who are Christian as like having lost their way and just come back to the Hindu fold and things like that. So there are a lot of individuals here who identify as Hindu and who are not very necessarily informed ideologically. And so if such individuals are told, Hinduism is being attacked, they are responsive to that, right? They don't know the whole story. So there's that other kind of grouping. That being said, I would also say that there's been latent anti-Muslim sentiment in many parts of South Asia for a long time. Okay? It was exacerbated during the time of partition, and people whose families were directly impacted on all borders, etc. But there are those kinds of roots as well. And so various aspects that help mobilize support for this, right? And so when we are critical, we call out Hindu ethno-nationalism, then we are accused of being Hindu-phobic. Not as much in Montreal, but in Toronto, there's a very strong grassroots organization that has been working on the issue of casteism in the South Asian community. And they have been very successful in, for example, getting the Toronto District School Board, which is the largest school board in Canada, to recognize caste as a form of hate. And when they did that, the school board was called out for being Hindu-phobic. And a petition was launched on the House of Commons page in Canada to get Hindu-phobia recognized in Canada as a form of hate. And the minute we were aware of this, we had to mobilize very quickly with all the links that we have across Canada, also writing to MPs and politicians and saying wait a minute, yes, there is anti-brown racism, very much so, but Hindu-phobia per se, calling out casteism, is not Hindu-phobic. It's actually the people who are accusing us of being Hindu-phobic are from dominant castes and sort of doing a lot of education, but it takes a lot of work because people are so used to now anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, okay, Hindu-phobia, yeah, that's a thing. And it must be terrible, if it's Hindu-phobic, sign the petition. etc. And we've run afoul of such groups over here where they have called us out and doxed us because they've been holding workshops with the SPVM, the Montreal police. They've done similar things in Calgary and Vancouver where, all
Around this distorted view of
Yeah.
Hindophobia.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of police forces have, parts of their establishment who work on hate crimes. And so organizations that are Hindu ethno-nationalist, many of them actually are in the US and now they've crossed the border and they're working here. And they have deep pockets and they have full-time people working on it all the time. So they've been holding these workshops on hate speech. And if you're Hindu and you're facing this, so when we heard that one was organized in Montreal, we were really upset because we knew where it was coming from. It's creating something where there is nothing. And it's kind of saying if you're Hindu and somebody attacks you, it's because they're Hindu phobic.
Right. I think it's interesting because before you mentioned about this shared tactic between some Israeli settlers and some of these Hindu nationalists being that bulldozer, I also see the similarity, right, between the kind of instrumentalization of hate speech, right? Because there's that very common thing the IJV always talks about with the definition of anti-Semitism, people, especially Zionists, working to include criticism of Israel into that kind of definition of hate speech, right? I see that kind of similarity, or at least a sort of a parallel here with some of these Hindutva groups working to diminish criticism or to conflate criticism of, let's say, things like caste with racism, which I think is quite the conflation.
No, absolutely. And we say that they have taken this from the Zionist playbook. And actually, India and Israel have developed very, very close relations. I mean, there was a time when if you had an Indian passport, the Indian government didn't let you travel to Israel. And it supported Palestine and would give free education to Palestinian students, etc. Those days have long passed. India now is the largest purchaser of arms from Israel and is actually manufacturing assault weapons for Israel. This Indian billionaire who's very close to the government and funds a lot of what they're doing, owns, Haifa port, etc. So the links, the economic, political, ideological links, they've coined a word, the Hindu Alliance. And there are students here who say, come join and you'll get a free trip to Israel. You can go and see the Western Wall, etc. and our friends. And so it's very similar, ideological imperatives.
I've read articles about how, especially for something like former IDF soldiers, they go to India as a sort of a vacation away from the kind of violence.
It's very big. It's been like that for, like when you've done your service. South Africa was very big. India is very big. And from what I gather, Indian tourist sites really hate these tourists because they're really rowdy and oh no, here they come again. And it's nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It's just a behavioral thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, I remember talking many years ago to a Jewish woman in Montreal, and at one time she had lived in Israel and she'd served in the Israel Defense Forces, and after that she went to South Africa, and she said that was her political awakening because she suddenly saw apartheid, and she said, we have this, and she had been oblivious because you grow up, sometimes it's like seeing
it's normalized, I guess, for
an
her.
unhoused person, and now it's just so commonplace, etc. So it's that kind of thing, yeah.
Nice, incredible. I think we're kind of rounding out to the end of our time here, but I really do want to get more of your perspective, I guess, on where we are in the history, I guess, of South Asian diaspora organizing in Montreal. Because it sounds like in this current kind of era, iterations with groups like SADAC, Tisri Dunya, we have sort of, I guess, as you've described it, this organizing, raising awareness against Hindu fascism. We have some stuff that SADAC does, like mobilizing action for migrant justice. And I'm kind of curious, how would you describe this current chapter, and what were the ones that preceded it in terms of South Asian diasporic organizing here in Montreal?
Well, one is just the way the communications and media has changed, in the early 70s, there was no email. If you wanted to phone someone, you had the circular dial. So everything is very, very quick. So it also presents new kinds of challenges, the way information is spread, misinformation is spread. So it's like much more intense, I would say much more stressful, the speed at which things are happening. And it's almost like you're playing whack-a-mole, like something's come up, you got that, then there's something else. And again, we're all like volunteers who are doing this on the fly, and the people that we are working against, have full-time people on it, lots of money. Like you have trolls in India. There's a book, I Was an Indian Troll, like literally going on to all kinds of Facebook sites and just writing stuff, feeding this disinformation. So it is much more intense, demanding, etc. And in many ways, I shouldn't say the world is now in flames in a way, because it's always been, if you think of the 70s, 80s, there was the American war in Vietnam, but there was also anti-colonial movements happening in Africa, supported by and the forces against them were supported by imperialist powers, etc. So in some ways, it's not that different, but it just seems much more intense. Perhaps also you've never had a Trump who, like, from one minute to the next is constantly changing. And so it requires a different kind of energy and strategizing. And also in diasporic South Asian communities, there are young people who are very active, but not necessarily coming to South Asian organizing, because they see themselves much more, drawn to solidarity, say, with Palestine. And we're not saying that shouldn't be the case, but there are perhaps a lot of younger South Asians who are involved, but in housing rights and in a variety of other areas, which is I think good. But sometimes it makes the work we're trying to do related to South Asia a little more challenging.
Where can do you know where people can find out more about the work that's being done at SADAC?
There's a Facebook page. I believe there's an Instagram page also. I'm not very big on Instagram.
Probably better for your mental health, I would say.
And I know whenever there are events, things are posted with like contact information and QR codes, etc. But I would say Facebook would be a go-to place.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time coming onto our show and talking to us about SADAC, the work they're doing, and of course broadly the concerns and fascism coming out of India and how it's taken root so close in Montreal.
Thank you, Kalden and 514.
Of course. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Take care.